Hello, everyone. Welcome, Alexander. Good to see you. How's it going?
Good to see you, Harry. It's a nice, warm, sunny morning here in Los Angeles, and things are starting to clear up. So, hoping everything goes well for everyone out in your audience as well.
Lovely. Yeah, we've got a global audience today. I've noticed some people from around the world. So we've got from Cyprus, 7 p.m. here, early morning for you. And we have a hard stop at the hour. So I'm going to get straight in to what is everyone in for. So for everyone who doesn't know, Alexander's co-founder of Game Design Skills, got over 20 years in game design, worked on Blizzard, World of Warcraft, a lot of the bosses you've loved to play as a kid, a lot of input from Alexander, Riot, League of Legends, and more recently, Moon Studios for Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Built and mentored design teams for 10 plus years and has helped studios ship over 32 projects. Alex knows his stuff. So today, what we're going to cover. We're going to cover how to land your first game design job, what game studios want in designers, mistakes new designers must avoid, how to build a standout portfolio, ways to gain referrals from industry insiders, how to network, smarter ways to reapply after rejection, break into game design without a degree, how to prepare for design tests and interviews, and some reflections from the 20 years in industry. All the while, Q&A is peppered in throughout. So if you have questions, ask them. It's like Twitch, and we'll get to as many as we can. And any that we can't do, we'll try to facilitate after the chat with a little Discord group that we got prepped. Amazing. Okay. So, for where we start, Alexander, what drew you to game design?
Oh, well, I can tell you the origin story if you want.
Let's do it.
Back when I was about 6 years old, I was playing this game on the original Nintendo, which is great considering the Nintendo Switch announcement literally happened, an hour ago? Switch 2. We were playing Bubble Bobble, and we finally, again, we were like 3 or 4 years old. It had taken us 6 months to beat this game together. And finally, after seeing the real ending, my brother got so excited. He started flipping the cushions off the couch. We were running and screaming and dancing around. And I looked over and I said, I wanted to make everyone as happy as he was in that moment, right? And just as I said that in my head, all this name of developers just started floating by in Japanese. And I'm like, whatever the magic is, I got to figure out what that is and what that means. So that initially led to me learning Japanese, as well as, thinking that was what we had to do to get into the games industry, right? And eventually, I was very fortunate at the time that my father was one of the first programmers at IBM in Johnson City. And so he left programming texts around the house. And I started just reading them and started writing random code in the computer. And as I did things, I realized that, programming was something I was capable of. It was really creating experiences with them that I enjoyed. And so worked at a French video game studio when I was 13, and that just kind of snowballed into what I do now.
Very cool. So regarding today's event, it will be related to game design, but knowing what I've researched on game design skills, like a lot of this stuff is very applicable to really anyone looking to join, yes, the games industry, but just finding jobs. Like there's a lot of basics. I think I love the fact that you've done this for so long, so you've seen what's worked and what's not. So I'm excited to get stuck in. Very curious though, because you've worked on 3 awesome titles, the ones that I have today, and many more. But what's the most fun project, not to play, but to work on?
Oh man, that's torn, right? Well, the leadership at Moon Studios was a kind of a disaster. Building that game, I was like this first designer working full time on it. Was no rest for the wicked. So a lot of people know Moon for Ori, but we from 2020 until maybe it was actually 2019 until. No, wow, it was 2018. Doesn't matter. For about 5 years, I actually wrote the original design doc, helped build the initial kind of this first upgraded prototype for No Rest for the Wicked, built a lot of the core mechanics with Robin Hub and Joe Sopko, and really fleshed out that game into being what is going to be an amazing cooperative top-down action RPG. And so at the time, when it was mostly just me, Robin, Chris, Joe, we just had an amazing time going through and building a game and having the resources and art style from all these talented people. And we're able to bring that kind of really awesome gameplay experience together, And I particularly effective because I actually got to define the initial stages, saying, okay, we're going to start with an arena. It's just going to be about enemies. Then we're going to do a PvP arena. We're going to really make PvP tight before we roll into this massive Souls-like level design thing. Because Moon, at the end of the day, is very much a level design studio. And so having the ability to shape a really PvP experience with that was awesome.
Very cool. Alrighty. We want people listening, game designers, to have that experience too. So my first question is understanding what we're up against here. So in your words, why is the first game design job, yes, but just gaming job in general so tough?
Well, it's tough for a number of reasons, right? One, there is a certain factor that feels like I must be a chosen one that has been part of the design mythology for a very long time, right? This idea that either you need to be uniquely talented or that you need to, have someone take you on as your protege has been unfortunately very realistic because of the limited amount of resources around how to actually do game design. Now, there are a million resources out there on how to program something, how to work in Unity, how to make a tutorial, how to make a single feature work, right? I'm going to call out Mix and Jam, right? It's a phenomenal resource for people who want to learn how to build the crunchy bits of games. But when it comes to design thinking, that sort of stuff has been basically limited to blog posts and the occasional interview with a developer. And having lived through 4 studios worth of really amazing game developers, I've realized that there's consistent patterns and thinking that exist there. So when you're in that very first stage, you first off, you don't have the access to those sort of lessons, right? And 2, you don't know what to demonstrate on a portfolio or as content for game developers to show the developers you can do what they want you to do. For artists, it's great. Can you paint in our art style? Do you have an understanding of fundamentals, design? Do you have a good process? And you can show it visually. For programming, can you bring something out of nothing? Can you make these electric rocks talk, right? But for design, which is very much a mid-level role, and I think a lot of people don't realize getting into design, is that junior design is not the same kind of junior as a junior artist or junior programmer, where you can be slotted in and been like, hey, take care of this, right? For design, because your role by nature is about directing the actions of others, even an associate design position is actually about the difficulty level of a mid-level position, right? Because you need to have a certain level of communication and social skills on top of, the technical ability to execute in engines, the ability to make good decisions and to collaborate with others within the design discipline. And so you're actually training up on 2, if not 3 skills just to get that first initial job.
Point is super important. And
yeah,
I've noticed people kind of go from QA to a lot of roles when I spoke to people on the podcast. So QA is a common path for production. Yeah. And from what I understand, game design as well, because you get that base understanding, get the soft skills. What I want to get into now is the practical stuff. So what do recruiters look for in the first 60 seconds?
Sure. So it's tough because it depends on the role, right? There are so many different flavors of design, so many different shapes. So just as art can be, realistic 3D rendering or graphical anime style, they're looking to see what is your design philosophy, right? Do you have a structured approach to what you do? Do you show empathy and understanding for the players? Do you have experience iterating on things and trying multiple ideas, not just one? And then do you execute to quality? Do you have a consistent approach? And then ultimately, have you worked in that space before? So they're looking for things that give signatures of those. A given recruiter may not have the design skills to say, oh, this decision is good, but they do have the ability to say, do you have a step-by-step approach to how you attack things? Does your portfolio showcase that you do this type of work? Do you think about design in your free time? Are you passionate, interested, intrigued, and curious? And if so, great. That indirectly says, hey, this portfolio, this resume is worth the time and attention of a full-time designer who's going to be stopping their work, or if they're a lead, stopping their leadership of multiple designers to vet and interact with you.
And it's crazy because that's in 60 seconds, right? So this step-by-step process outline that is super important already. So if I ask you a question on how to build this resume and portfolio, so You've had over 500 students now mentored. And one thing I want to mention, which I forgot to mention before, is they've kindly given everyone here a very, very nice prize. And I'm saving it to the end to get people to listen. But please stick around, and everyone who's attending will receive it. And I want to ask you the question, when you look at all the students that managed to get the job, what was the biggest common factor?
Yeah. Number one is they really treated it like a job, updating their portfolio and building their content, right? That doesn't mean that they didn't do what was necessary to sustain their life, right? I always like to think about Michael Sweeto, right? Michael Sweeto was one of my first students and was literally one of the people who reached out to me before I was ever teaching over Twitter and was like, hey, how can I get teaching about what you do? And inspired me to put together my very first, oh God, it was over Skype, or was it even before Skype? Yeah, it was like, it might have been before Skype. And literally just jumped on calls with me once a week for 8 weeks. And I realized, oh, hey, here are the lessons I have. Here's how we teach them. And that guy not only was willing to work in weird and obscure game spaces, he was working on a violin classical music rhythm game, and but also willing to work on what was incredibly popular, interesting, and valuable to people hiring at the time. So we also did demos of Match 3 games, which led to him getting a job at Jam City. And he had that combination between he did the work, he loved the discipline, he loved the process of learning how to design, and frankly would not only argue for his ideas, but also listen to input and feedback and iterate it based on that feedback. And that's kind of the magic recipe, right? Because no matter where we are in life, right? Everyone thinks of designer as the person who sits down, has magical ideas. That's the creative director, and he's kind of a clusterfuck usually, right? Designers are about taking the best of the ideas, whether they're from the creative director or the random programmer or that guy in QA, filtering them and then refining them until they're something people can execute as a team within the game development ecosystem, right? And that means that you need to showcase that that is the type of person you are. You're someone who can bring people together, that you don't just have good ideas, but you can turn ideas into execution, and that you love the process, right?
Perfect. Can I ask a tactical question here? You mentioned treating it like a job, and I think it'd be good to paint a picture, because I'm sure people have a different definition of what that looks like for them. What would you say is the range here of, like, I guess, hours, effort?
Yeah, it depends, right? If you're executing an engine, you want to demonstrate technical skills. That could be, 50, 60 hours a week for a few weeks or even a few months on and off, building a prototype, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And if it's something where it's more about, documentation, content, that might be much lighter or intermittent, right? But even so, you sit down and you're like, okay, everyone wants to do this master game design document. I've always been hearing it since I was a child. That's a bunch of bullshit. Okay, do you know how many master game design documents I've done in my life? One. What was it for? No Rest of the Wicked. Well, did it help with development? Not really. Why? Because really, at the end of the day, it was individual feature documents, these little bits of like, hey, here's a piece of the game, here's a piece of the game. And at the end of the day, this master game design document was a Google Doc that indexed all of these little feature documents. And even then, it was for the investors, just to prove to them we were thinking through the issues, right? In actual development, games development is messy. You don't get to do these master plans and then just execute on them. You try little bits, you iterate. You try bits, you iterate. And so documentation, portfolios that showcase that sort of thing are way more interesting. One of our guys would build in Funsmith Club, built initially what was literally every week, he'd bring in a little black and white screen with some numbers and texts on it. It was supposed to be a card game. We were just like, okay, it's a card game. Got it. We would imagine card games existing over these blocks of text. He went away for a couple of weeks. I came back a month later, and you know what? All of a sudden, it had a knight fighting mice being controlled by the cards and the card game. But he already figured out the card game and the basics of what he wanted to demonstrate before he went in, built the graphical prototype, made it look really cool. And all of a sudden, people were like, when did this become a game? And I'm like, it was always a game. It's just that whether you see it as a game in presentation or not is the craft of game design, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel that is one of those stories where literally 2 months of work transformed what was already this is after months of structural work, suddenly transformed it into something that the general basic consumer suddenly saw as a game, right?
Yeah.
And so people need to remember that there's so much stuff that goes into before that, and that's the type of work that isn't as exciting or as sexy, and that's the structural work that leads to success. So that's the kind of mindset you need to have. What are the things I need to build up to eventually get to this point? Not I need to jump up here to this impossible rung and grab onto it for dear life.
Yeah, I mean, here in the first example, like Funsmith Tavern as well, just to define that, it's a Discord server, right? And it's a part of the Discord server that has a lot of people sharing this kind of. Do you mind giving a quick rundown? Because I think it's a very useful resource.
Sure. The Funsmith Club, which I think we have a URL for,
I'll pop it over.
Effectively a community where we have both AAA game designers and a lot of people struggling to get into the industry. And we cover narrative design as well as game mechanics design, and basically just give a place for people to sit and get really crunchy on design. People will bounce their ideas off there. We have peer play tests every 2 weeks where people bring in their game prototypes, and 7-8 people will sit there and play test it with you, giving feedback and input and ideas. It's also where we kind of have the home to the paid service community as well, right? So people who are taking our courses, they have private channels. They get direct feedback from me and the other designers leading our courses. And it gives kind of a sense of history, right? Not only do you get to see your answers to your questions, but also the answers everyone in the community has had to the same questions, the same assignments, the same work. And you get to see this variety of inputs and perspectives. That's a massive resource itself on top of the stuff you learn in the courses.
Perfect. So I noticed in one of the guides you have on the website, Game Design Skills, you mentioned about reverse engineering games.
Yes.
I can imagine that being a rabbit hole, which isn't that productive if you don't do it the right way. So I guess, like, how should people approach the reverse engineering part? Okay,
I can answer that. So when I say reverse engineering, right, for a programmer, that's breaking down how an individual feature works, right? How do the inputs work? What is the design developed structure? How does this client server work? For a piece of art, it's sitting there and imagining, like, hey, how would I structure this face? How do I make this style stand out? How do I render it differently to express it in this unique way? It's very similar for game design, right? For game design, it's about, hey, can you see past the veneer, the illusion of the game itself, right? Can I see past the visuals to see the game mechanics? Can I see the objects? Can I see the hitboxes? Can I see the shape of the interactions and map that out? Do I understand that Mario at the end of the day, right, let's take Mario 64, is really a sphere moving around a bunch of spaces, right? With an amazing set of presentations and controls based on dynamic inputs that preserves momentum. Or, the power-up system is really just changing changing the graphic representation of Mario and what happens when you press this button or that button. But otherwise, the character controller is basically the same. Do you understand how a boss fight is broken down? That there's a series of phases that are triggered by health. Do you understand why they do that? Do you understand how they communicate where every single lava ball from Bouncer is bouncing off? Do you understand what they do to indicate to the player you can grab his tail and spin him around in circles and send him flying? Sorry, Pops. Right. Can you break it down and understand not only what the pieces are presentation-wise, but what the intention and purpose was to go step by step through the game and understand it? As an example, when I interviewed at Riot Games, one of the questions that they asked me was like, hey, right now there are 5 roles, but only 3 lanes and 1 jungle. Was that a mistake? And I'm like, well, that's a great question because it goes really, really deeply into the game. And I knew the reason that they were asking this was because a competitor had just came out with a game with 4 lanes and a jungle, so everyone had a spot to go. And I'm like, well, right now, I don't know that having lanes where people have 2 people in it is a problem. But right now, if you don't have a jungler, you are dramatically far behind in terms of resources. Okay, so we have a resourcing problem there. Second, we have a problem that when those 2 people are in lane together, they're leeching off of each other, right? The idea, but yet despite that, playing with a support in a lane or 2 characters in a lane is actually a more fun and engaging and turbulent experience than it is to be two men smacking each other in the face in top lane, right? As a result, even today, you still hear the complaint that, hey, top lane is this slow, agonizing duel that the jungler shows up and messes up, right? And so I'm like, so can we address those problems while keeping the best qualities of what makes bot lane? And they were intrigued by this. Like, okay, great, let's talk about this. And then that actually led to me working when I started. They were originally hiring me for an action RPG that never got released in R&D back at Riot back in the day. But instead, they said, well, actually, why don't we have you try to fix this problem in League of Legends? So I went in and actually did the support rework with Kuo Yen Lo and a few others. And we actually sat there and said, how do we solve these problems? And I added the items in the game that were support money generating items. I actually was the one who said, why don't supports make as much money as everyone else? They're like, they'd be too powerful. I'm like, then that is a support design problem, not an economy problem. And sure enough, when we had the conversation with Mark Yetter, he was like, yeah, we should sit down and pull the trigger and fix all the supports. Let's break the game by giving them too much money and fix the supports that are broken. Everyone on the design team was scared about this. I was even scared about this. But I can persuade everyone to get us up to 80, 90% of the ADC's income. Let's go that far, see how it is, see what breaks. Game worked. Game felt better. All of a sudden, a great diversity of new characters could be played in bot lane. And all of a sudden, everyone's lights went on to be like, oh, this is the root problem that's been holding us back forever. I'm like, yeah. And then, Kuo and I basically built out things like the Targon shield that would share last hits, or the Frost Queen's claim that would allow you to harass enemies in lane, or the one that would just passively generate resources, mana, and HP, but required you to be using them in lane. And it turned out that players loved it. They actually went on to build a fourth item after I departed, as well as shaping up that role to have things like ward generation and so on. And that's an example of taking a game, breaking it down, and pointing out, hey, this is where the problem is. Now that we understand where the root problem is, let's not be afraid of the root problem. Let's fix that root problem. And once that root problem is solved, all this untangling happens where all these things fall apart and you fix all of the side effects, and all of a sudden the nature of the game is improved for everyone.
Love it. I'm going to use this. I have questions, but we have so much topics. It's super cool.
Sure.
I'm going to use this to jump into the interview process now. So I know many people who were looking for a long time. They finally get the interview. They do the interview. They don't get feedback. So unless you're in a community where you can, I guess, have some practice. So I want to talk about the interview process now. And also, just a quick highlight. This is like Twitch. Any questions you pop in the chat, we will come to. So my question is about the interview process. I like this frame of question. What would you say is the biggest mistake people are doing? Let's nip that in the bud.
Absolutely. Number one, to make the answers all about themselves and showing off rather than showing that they understand the problems, right? One of the times is when you sit down and let's say, what genres do you love, Harry?
What genres do I love? The most games I play are currently card games on my phone. So like Hearthstone, Balatro.
Card games. Okay, great. Tell me about a problem in Balatro. Just tell me what the problem is.
I don't understand why some of the jokers don't just track the metrics. The mods do it very nicely. I'd love to know how good my joker is across the run.
Okay, great. Great. Oh, that's an amazing problem. Go ahead and fix it.
Okay, let's track how much money this joker's made and have it visible. And
congratulations, you just fell into the first trap of a game design interview. You immediately rolled into a solution without asking me, the interviewer, or for explanation of my own perspective. Also, hey, you didn't actually ask, well, how much time and resources do we have? How do we focus on the right things here? What are the goals of any changes I'm about to make here? Or at least defining it yourself. Now, go ahead, continue with the exercise.
I like that. Okay. Now I'm roasting myself in my head, though. So
we can keep moving if you want to, but that's the thing, right? Basically, go ahead and ask me a similar question.
Cool. What games do you love? What game genre do you like?
Oh man, I've been playing a lot of Stellaris lately. If you know that game at all. So if you know something, if you know that game, great. If not, feel free to pick something more standard.
Let's pick Stellaris. It's done by Paradox. I know there's resource management. My question as an interviewer is, what is currently wrong with Stellaris?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, first off, we need to define what we evaluate as wrong. Is it things that are cycling people out of the game? Is it things that are hard to play and interact with? Is it things that are inscrutable and hard to understand? Or is part of that mystery and discovery part of the desired experience, right? For example, if you'd ask me, one of the things that is wrong with Stellaris is that right now there's a really high effort, low reward system known as espionage, right? And espionage is a really cool idea, right? It's this idea that, hey, I can spy another empire, figure out what they're doing, and then use that information to make better decisions with how I engage with them. Does that seem fair, right? Well, the issues I have is that right now, the amount of time I'm willing to put in with my personal time and attention is way too high for the rewards you get. Okay, great. That could be as easy as changing the tuning of the rewards, but I don't think that would solve the root problem because the core UI interaction with it is really clunky, hard to get into, right? And furthermore, a lot of these things feel rehashed as opposed to like a really well thought out, in-depth interaction system with counterplay and interactions. Okay, great. Now, in this case here, you're going to be playing the interviewer. So I just gave you 3 different approaches I could take to solving this problem with the system. Go ahead and pick one of those and then push back on me.
I want to highlight how you straight away went in to define the question. But in my example, I just assumed one version of the question, started answering it. And I think that's a very big thing to highlight. Great. So you mentioned the UI being very clunky. That sounds expensive. Like, okay, there's the interviewer. So let me think of a question. So when it comes to the UI problem, what would you tackle first?
That's a great approach. So let's pretend that we didn't have a lot of development resources in the game engine itself. We have to ruthlessly prioritize. Hint, this is something you have to do all the time as a game designer. And you only get to choose to fix one thing. The biggest thing I would fix is that to change from empires, to go through all the empires you're spying on, you have to go to this little pull down, or you have to go to the zoom across the world map, click on that empire, click on a UI, click on spy button, right? You have to like talk to the ambassador and then click the spy button. Whereas I would much rather have a UI that is the spy screen and just block that has a list just of the empires I'm spying on, separated from the list of the empires I might want to spy on. Hint, there's plenty of information. They actually have all this information in a sorted pop-down list, but get rid of that pop-down, just make it a UI element. When I click on each empire, it then pops the screen that currently has the existing espionage UI in place. Is that an amazing change? No. But it immediately reduces the amount of button clicks I have to do, add a hotkey there, right? And go, right? We can even put it with the same hotkey as negotiation and other things like that, but you cannot hide it in the corner under this little flyout because it's too hard to get to. You have to move your mouse all the way to the screen. If you're dealing with spying, if you're trying to be a master spy character, either through RP reasons or through PvP reasons, you're trying to keep an eye on all the enemies around you. I play a little bit in Weekend Stellaris Club, and guess what? They pack you in 20 people a game, right? Well, if I'm watching 5 people, I don't want to be going here, and through a 4-step process every time. So let's go ahead and figure out a way for me to get one-click empire, one-click empire. The second layer to this is that all of these actions, often if I've done it once, I want to run it a second time or a third time, right? And not have to go through this UI screen. So let's figure out a way to say, repeat this action 3 times. Okay, great. Awesome. Let me go steal technology back to back as soon as I can. If I can't, just give me information about where the enemy fleets are. And so, as you kind of see there, right, I defined, hey, if I can't change the underlying systems, I'm going to focus on the presentation. I'm going to focus on the way the player interacts with this UI. And that alone would make a huge change. There you go.
I love that. The example you gave directly was the least resource way to answer that question. And then obviously you highlighted we could go deeper, but let's not start with that. Very cool. So is there one thing you want to add on about interviews before I move on to reapplying?
Oh, man. First off, I would say, again, have multiple answers, but first seek understanding of how they're prioritizing. If they ask you to prioritize, explain your process. and have a process, have a justification for what you decide. When you have a reason behind whatever choice you are making, it makes it questionable. It makes it reevaluatable in the future. If, let's pretend, for example, Harry, you go out and you buy a sandwich, you make it with, we'll say white bread. Great. And then tomorrow there is evidence that all white bread in the United States has been poisoned. That sandwich is sitting in your fridge. Do you eat it?
I would not eat it.
Right? Because let's say all of it, 100%. We wouldn't do it because we understand the criteria. At the time I purchased this, I believed it was all good. Now I believe it is poisoned. Okay, great. You will now change your beliefs based upon the level of evidence. Now, let's say we believe 1% of the bread in the United States was poisoned. Okay, we might still choose to throw it away, but if we chose not to, we'd understand, hey, we probably are going to be okay the majority of the time. But if everyone eats the bread, a lot of people will die, right? That allows you to make a better decision based upon the risks and information. It just likewise, if I said, hey, I added a fireball to Mario 7 because I thought that an insta-kill at range ability was fair and reasonable, great. Maybe that was the case when I built the game. But now that we've added the cat suit, the Tanuki suit, and all these things, we have to realize, oh, actually, fireball can only do 1 hit's worth of damage now. We can't just have the fireball kill Bowser anymore, because the universe rules and understanding of the game have changed, so we can reevaluate our prior decisions. Whereas if you blindly just do something like, it seemed cool, you don't have a criteria to undermine your own work in the future and reevaluate it.
Nice. I gave interview prep sessions when I was a recruiter. I've done probably 150 plus. The main problem I saw was a lack of structure when it comes to answering questions. So I always recommended the STAR technique: situation, the task, the action I made, and then the result.
Great.
But even after doing the prep, saying we have to do the STAR technique, don't make a 20-minute intro.
Yep.
Those are the 2 things that ended up being the reason some great candidates as well didn't get the job, because the introduction was literally 15 minutes, even after going over it a lot of times. But also the STAR technique, they might do it once, but then they forget, and then just forget that the answer is to make themselves look better, not to answer the question. Any advice for people going into an interview to, I guess, stick to those basics? Like, one thing I wanted to ask, it's a very long question, I appreciate, is the fact that a lot of these interviews are now virtual.
Yep.
Is there an argument to have some answers prepped on one screen? Like I have my LinkedIn chat here and then the interviewer person here.
Yep.
What goes into like a virtual interview prep?
Ooh, man. Again, a lot of people think that you have to have some sort of master design that you can sell and convince. But most of the time, if you've gotten to the interview, they've already looked at your work. They already have a sense of you probably can do the job. What they're looking for is, can I do the job with you? Do I want to do the job with you? Right. And so this is unfortunately where both bias and experience come into play, right? Is that, hey, they're looking for pattern matches against experiences they've had with designers before. I know one really talented producer who keeps picking some of the worst, partners in the industry, because what he looks for in a creative director is a person who is egotistical and confident to overcome his own lack of confidence and beliefs, as opposed to saying, hey, what are the things that I need to do, or that I need complemented, which is I need decisive choices and decision-making. I need, someone who has creative ideas, because my ideas are not all that creative, or I just don't have the time and energy to focus on them. But I need someone I can trust who won't hurt the people around them. Okay, great. Cool. That gives you a set of indexes for working with you in your game industry context, right? Okay, great. So I think that a lot of people, when they sit there in that interview or are getting ready for that interview, think there's a master plan. Instead, you need to basically suss out what they are looking for and say, actually, is this the job for me, right? And having that reframe is very important, right? For example, if I was working with you and you were like, everyone comes to work in white t-shirts every day because I want everyone to feel super chill, right? It'd be very reasonable. It makes sense in the culture you might establish, right? But I'd be like, actually, I feel super uncomfortable in white t-shirts. I don't feel like I'm self-expressive or creative. And so even though I might have the great skills to work in your team and look like I would fit in, that would actually make me feel like I'd be less effective as a person being who I am. That's a great example of where, hey, maybe it's fine that you have those skills, but it's not a good match. Likewise, I'm looking for a designer who is going to sit there and iterate on numbers and like combat animations and not really worry about the big picture stuff. I've got a big picture guy. That's a great job for a certain segment of people, right? There's a whole lot of people who would love to just get there in the numbers and then just let other people worry about the chaos of the business. Then there's designers like me who I want a view of everything. And I'm willing to get into the numbers and fix things where it's necessary. But at this point, I'm concerned about the big picture of the game. Okay, great. I'm the wrong designer to be working in level design on a specific level. I'm a really good designer if you need someone to look at your systems and motivations and interactions and says, hey, is this the right thing to be doing for the players? It's the same thing when you're going in to interview for a position with a particular team. We're looking for someone who can do X, Y, and Z. You need to be asking yourself, well, for me to be successful in that role, I would need A, B, and C. Are those things present here in this company, right? And then, boom, you get to know if that context is right for you, and they get to understand that, hey, here are the things that make you work, and you can treat every interview as a collaborative process of understanding rather than a competitive one of I have to destroy all of these anonymous competitors, because you don't know. And so as you interact with them and ask them what they're looking for, you can get a sense for, is this type of role looking for these same things consistently? Do I have these things? Can I explain and present those things? And that, just as developing a portfolio is a job, so too is interviewing. Just as, Harry, you've gotten better at interviewing people as you've done, several hundred interviews, right? You will get better as you interview with more companies and get a sense for what they want. If you can, you don't want your first interview to be with your dream company because you're not going to be at the quality of what they are 80% of the time. And so you'll feel like you've lost instead of being like, actually, I'm going to build my way up to that boss battle. I'm going to interview at a bunch of companies, get understanding what they want, showcase I can crush those interviews, and then be like, you know what? I think I'm up to the standards quality. And I understand the philosophies of this company, right? Based on the games that they make and what I love. And here's how they're aligned. Do you know what it was that got me through my first interview at Blizzard out the gate? It was a little bit of that I'd worked on mods. They knew that I could work inside their engine. But more than that is that I was super aligned with the values of what Blizzard's culture was, right? I was willing to push back on ideas, even when the leadership was the one handing it out. There was this little moment with Rob Pardo, who's kind of known to be a bit of a bully, right? Especially in interviews, and he liked to push people. And so he said, hey, what are your thoughts on Shadow of the Colossus? And I'm like, it was really a pretty looking game, but I thought the gameplay was kind of dull, kind of just climb up this environment, very rote, stick the sword in the head and rinse, repeat over and over again. He's like, that got game of the year. It was considered one of the best games that came out that year. I'm like, yeah, I didn't think it was all that much. It was visually cool. It was thematically aligned. But for me, I'm a mechanics and gameplay person. The gameplay was climb hairy beast, stick sword in head. And he's like, well, I was one of the people who voted for it for game of the year. I'm like, that's great. You are totally welcome to have your opinion of it. But for me, it did not hit any big notes. And so I would never have chosen that as game of the year because it doesn't align with my values and opinions. He was like, okay, well, I guess we disagree. And I thought I washed out of the interview there because, I'm like, I didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. He went back and there was then 3 people, Tom Chilton, Rob Pardo, and Jeff Kaplan. And they all went back and Jeff was like, I'm not sure. And Tom was like, I think this guy's got good mechanics sense. And Rob was the deciding vote. He was the one who said, this guy will push back even when we're making bad decisions and will offer alternative solutions. And he loves mechanics, which is the kind of shop we were, or at the time we were. And so he was deciding vote to said, let's get this guy in. And Jeff, to be fair, was kind of like, who's correct actually that I was young and inexperienced. But that willingness to say, hey, here's where I disagree with your values was the thing that brought me the value in their organization, right?
Yeah, fantastic. And it's the reframe of, yes, it's an interview for them to understand if you can do the job, but most of the interview is understanding if they can do it with you as a person. Also on the reverse, if I can work in this company, and if you're not doing that self-filtering, then they might get that red flag. Like you hear the advice, never finish an interview and don't ask the interviewer questions. Well, it's very important because if you didn't have that kind of understanding, like, look, this is how I think about these things, they wouldn't have then come to the understanding, okay, this guy has at least, everyone has guardrails of where they say, I wouldn't work in a situation that doesn't have this, but you don't have that collaborative process, then they won't get to understand that.
Yeah. Let me shout out my friend Sam. I see chatting in here. Sam, amazing designer. Great seeing you here. We've actually gotten dinner a few times talking about his own experiences in design and consulting. So good to see you, Sam.
Legend. Good to have you.
Yeah. And, ultimately, it really is that just as you go through each interview, you're training yourself on how to interview better. And it's not about just bending and being who they want, right? You need a little bit of that. You need to showcase you're willing to understand what they want. You also need to show that you understand yourselves. And that goes pretty far. Now, the issue is, as a junior person, you don't know yet what are the things that are important for me to stand up on and represent that are important to who I am and how my design approach works versus what is just, I don't know things yet. And my showcasing it is ignorance. And that's a lot of what we try to train in game design skills, right? It's like, hey, do you have an understanding of the fundamentals? Everyone wants to learn the really one cool trick that designer did in that one game that made this animation cooler or made this hit feel better without understanding, well, what was the reason that Stinger, right? A root motion attack that teleports you to the target was the correct choice in Devil May Cry. Why was it the wrong choice in Ori and the Will of the Wisps, right? And then you can be like, hey, actually, here's why we did this, why we didn't do this, and make the right choices in the right time and place.
Perfect. Alrighty. We have 8 more minutes of Alexander's kind time. So I will use the time to answer the questions we got in the chat. And I see a lot of people have signed up. So everyone, you're welcome. And let's go to the chat. Let's go to the questions. So
let's do it.
Scrolling up. 3. There we go. Boom. We've got Luca. So Luca's question is, how to design an action game level without having to work on character movement? Is it event possible, i.e. ledge, hanging, grappling, hook, or other mechanics? And I'll add my little thing on top. I'm guessing this is for the example of a portfolio, like a mini version. I guess you could answer the big version.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because you generally have a much easier time if you play test the things you have. So, but fortunately, there are character controller packages that have a lot of these things built in, even if they're not the greatest. I think of the Corgi 2D package as an example that has jump jets and grappling hooks and air dash and all of these things that is available. You can just purchase for Unity. Don't build a new character controller, use that one and then build your level designs around the constraints of that character controller. I think in Unreal, there isn't quite as developed a asset store space. So you might have to build some prototypes there. But yes, you can build the level design, an action game level, without any of the mechanics in there. If you showcase that you understand the spacing, the communication, the visual understanding. That said, the details of that are even beyond my personal experience, right? I am not an action game level designer, but someone like Nathan Kellman, right, would be able to say, oh yeah, well, build this, think about this. Can you showcase that you understand what it is that makes a grappling hook point in Metroid Prime 4 work? Also announced recently. I actually applied for a job on there, didn't get the interview, sadly. And that's okay, right? The things that I was like, oh man, maybe I'll get to work on a Nintendo game before my end of days. Didn't happen, right? Because I didn't have the skill set they needed, right? I'm not a person who can basically say, here's all the level design steps in a 3D Metroidvania. But doesn't mean that if you can't, right? If you spend the time to break down their games and content and showcase how their levels are structured and that you can recreate it, and then showcase those pieces and put them against, here's an ability video of your character running through the space doing this thing. Here's a space where they would be tested in the same way. You don't need the character controller if you can demonstrate you have the challenge for the player.
Brilliant. We have a question from Louise, which is a tactical one about portfolio. So what are a few efficient ways to show depth of design thinking and solution iteration, especially when recruiters and hiring managers spend mere seconds on your website?
Sure. Get the information they need front and center, right? Showcase the games you work on, what skills you applied, and then let them dig deeper. Make it intriguing for them to click the link because they want to see what's underneath it to get to your process. Don't have a web page that is just, giant column of process. Teaser, image, video, link, skills demonstrated. Click here for details. We talk about all this in the portfolio course.
Legend. Nice. I have a few bonus questions from myself. And if anyone has any questions, you have 3 minutes to get them in. So my question is on, actually, you kind of mentioned it right now. So You applied
Yep.
to a job and didn't get it. This happens
Yep.
a lot in the games industry, and the games
Yep.
industry is small. So what do you advise people when it comes to reapplying to studios?
I would say whenever you have demonstrably leveled up your skills, apply again. There's a guy named Dave Kosak. He was a comic artist, right? Or writer over at, I forget the GameSpy, I think it was. He applied 7 times to Blizzard Entertainment every single year on the day. Every single time first round, he got bounced. Second one, he actually got to someone looked at it. Third time, he got looked at and reviewed and a little bit of feedback. Fourth time, he actually got a voice call. And they were like, yeah, you're not a skill yet. That guy ended up as the lead quest designer on World of Warcraft. He was persistent, resilient, and every single time he came back, you saw how fast he was leveling up. And it was like, oh shit, this guy is growing fast. And so I think it may have been 5 years, 7 applications, but he eventually got in. And once he did, he skyrocketed through that team by showcasing understanding of the community, the product, the content, and was a phenomenal human being to work with, just straight up.
Love the answer. Tactical question. Does it depend on the studio how long you wait between applications? You mentioned you would wait until you leveled up.
Yep.
If I felt like I leveled up every 3 months, should I apply every 3 months?
I think 3 months is pretty fast, but let's say you had a pile of skills and just weren't showcasing them. You could apply again 3 months later. But I think 6 months to a year is more reasonable. Generally, companies are not going to care that you applied again. I do know that a few companies have, reapply in a year, but mostly that's just to keep it from being spammy. Also, apply for all the jobs that you think you fit, but make sure that each application is targeted. They're only going to turn you down shotgunning if you're literally shotgunning without purpose.
Yep.
But if I gave 4 different portfolios and contents for 4 different jobs, they were all really tight, no one's going to be upset that you applied again.
Sweet. I'll give you 60 seconds to answer this question. And then, unfortunately, Krethik will have to do that async. So, Rick, are there aspects of the other disciplines of game development, such as programming or art, that can transfer into game design?
Absolutely. Programming teaches you structural, organized thinking. Art teaches you emotional expression and visual communication. Those are vital to game design.
Oh, we have time for the last one. Hi, Alex.
Sure.
I have a question. When we complete a game and there is one feature that is not implemented, but there's only 1 day time, what is the right strategy to solve this?
You have to cut it. You have 1 day. You're not going to get time, iteration, or bug testing on it. You have to cut it, put it in patch 1.
We did it.
Boom.
Well, mic drop. Amazing. Everyone who's joined on LinkedIn, thank you so much for being here live. And Alexander, thanks again. Where can people find you? I'm going to say LinkedIn or...
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best spot. I'm also at Zelnath, XELNATH, on every social media platform possible except Facebook. But I know the guy who has my username, and Facebook would actually not let him transfer it to me. Anyways, great. It was, hey, Harry, really tight interview here. I do have a hard out, but thank you so much. The audience, thank you guys for all your great questions. If you have more, just start asking them inside our Discord or on LinkedIn. Me and my team will get back to you as soon as possible. And Harry, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Later.
Cheers.
Cheers.